ＨAIRETE pantes! ΧΑΙΡΕΤΕ pantes! Pos ekete humes! Hoi matheitai mu. Here's something I thought was really neat that definitely is a good illustration of why studying the biblical languages, or studying Greek in this case, helps you see things that you can't see from English translations and stuff. And not faulting translators. I mean, I don't know, one day maybe I'll be blessed to participate in a translation, be in a translation team. And I know there's always trade-offs when you're doing translation. It's like, well, you know, it could be understood this way, it could be understood this way, so you got to make a choice. But yeah, if you don't know the biblical languages, you got people on your behalf making choices for you, and this is going to be one illustration for that. So let's dig in. So this video is about, did Jesus really call Judas friend? When Judas was betraying him and they came up and kissed him, he told the Romans, hey, this is going to be a sign. When you see me kiss him, that's the one that is Jesus of Nazareth. And so then Jesus calls him, this Greek word, ἑταῖρος, we're going to see. And the question is it rightly understood as friend? Is it that simple, or is there more to it? Okay, so English translations, for simplicity of translation, translate the passage indicating Jesus to call Judas friend. And when he kissed him, I mean, I'm highlighting this because the word that typically really means friend shares the same root as kiss. And then Judas betrayed Jesus, right? So does the Greek New Testament agree with this translation of friend, or is it actually kind of indicating a little bit more to it? Maybe completely different, maybe a little bit different. Let's take a look. Let's consider a few things. So in the Gospel of John, I mean, all four Gospels show some information about the account of Jesus's basically laying his life down for the world, as Isaiah 53 describes. So in Gospel of John, start from chapter 13 to 18. It's the same night. It's Passover night when Jesus is about to become the Passover Lamb of God, take away the sin of the world, as John the Baptist said he was. So John 12, we're leading up to that time. John 12 starts out with the story of Lazarus and him, being raised from the dead. And there's a few days from verse 1 until you go to the whole account of how many verses it is that captures that account of Lazarus being raised from the dead. I mean, some days pass by, probably at least 4 days. At the very beginning, it says 6 days before Passover. So by the end of chapter 12, we're getting really close to Passover Day, which Passover Day is starting in chapter 13, right? So here in chapter 12, we see Jesus towards the end of the chapter, we see him make this statement. He says, now is the judgment of this world, now will the ruler of this world be cast out. And we're getting ready to see, once we jump into chapter 13, Satan very involved with what's going on at this Passover dinner, the Last Supper, right? And so here, Jesus is making a declaration, as he's called him many times, the ruler of this world. He says the ruler of this world be cast out. He was indicating what Colossians chapter 1 and 2 talks about, how Jesus overcame Satan on the cross. And even Hebrews chapter 2, verse 13 to 15 says what happens also is that that he needed to become flesh and blood. It says there, Hebrews chapter 2, 13 to 15. He needed to become flesh and blood. Let's see if I can remember this. Set them free from him, kept them enslaved all their lives, that is the devil. He talks that way. Anyway, so starting in chapter 13, we're just looking at an aerial view here, overview, some high points here. We see John says that Satan suggested to Judas at the very beginning of the chapter to betray Jesus, and Judas did that. He hears that voice in his head, and he does it. Of course, the way Hebrews speak, the way Jews speak, the way Israel speaks in the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, is it's always about the heart. So it's like Satan suggested to his heart. It kind of talks that way, right? To the Greeks, they would use the word psyche, a lot of times, which is typically translated as soul. But it's where we get the word psychology. So basically, psycheology, so the study of the soul, right? The study of the psyche, the study of the thinking and mind. But anyway, like I said, Jews would use the word heart. Anyway, After this, we see Judas get his feet. My mouse. Where is my mouse? There it is. After this, we see Judas get his feet washed along with the 11. So Jesus, humbles himself. He takes off his outer garment. He puts a towel around his waist, gets down on his feet, and he washes all 24 of their feet. He washes all of their feet, all 12 of them, including Judas, right? And then they're eating food. And John, leaning on Jesus, says, hey, who's the one that's going to betray you? You're telling us that somebody's going to betray you? Is it me? And they're all like, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And then Jesus indicates to John, I don't know if he whispered it or whatever, but he tells John that, hey, I'm going to dip my bread in this, and then to whom I give the dipped bread, that's the one that's going to betray me. So he did that. Judas receives it. Apparently he ate it. And right after that, there's something really significant there happening spiritually, and Satan enters into Judas, it says, which is interesting. And then he goes out from among them. So keep in mind, this is a human vessel that is basically a temple of the devil, because now he's walking around filled. Instead of filled with the Spirit of God, he's filled with the Spirit of Satan, right? Okay. So this is all the way to the time till we get to chapter 18 where the Romans come with Judas. Okay, so chapter 14, these are some significant events that are happening. Judas is no longer with them. Keep that in mind. We're not going to see Judas again until chapter 18. We see a conversation happen between Jesus and his disciples. He says the one who loves him does what he commands. And by the way, I'm using English because this would take an enormous amount of time unless I'm talking to people that are intermediate or advanced in Greek, this would take an enormous amount of time for me to walk through all this stuff in Greek, so I'm not going to do that. But there is a certain portion of this, of course, this is a Greek channel, that is going to be in Greek. We'll get there, so just hang tight. He says, the one who loves him, Jesus is talking to his disciples, he's like, if any of you guys love me, here's what you'll do. Okay, he says this in verse 15, he says in verse 21, verse 23, he says, you'll do what I command. Right? And then we're going to see in verse 14 here in a second something a little more crisper that he says in that regard. Same idea, right? Jesus even ties the loving of obedience choice of his disciples, verse 21 and 23, to being determined of whether his Father and the Son, Jesus and me as well, my Father and I, we will come to that person if this person obeys me. He says the one that obeys me loves me. So the one that loves me, my Father, in other words, the one who loves him is the one that obeys his commandments. He says, we'll come, my Father will come to him, and I will come to him also, because they share the same Spirit, hint, hint, right, the Holy Spirit, and he will make their home with that disciple of Jesus, right? Because remember the Great Commission, Matthew 28, 18 to 20, it's go into all the world. He said this to his apostles, the 11, right? He says, Paul wasn't with him yet, it was just the 11. And then we're going to roll right into Acts chapter 1, where they roll the dice, or they cast lots to see who the 12th one would be to replace Judas. But this is just the 11. He says the 11, go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, right? So all these things that we see in the Gospels about disciples, it applies to that. Because Jesus then says, and baptize them this way, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then in verse 20, he says, and teach them to keep everything I've commanded them. That's what somebody that makes disciples is to be doing. Not what your church leaders command, but what Jesus commands, right? This is why it's important to study the words of Jesus, like our lives depend on it. Okay. Verse 15, Judas still not with them, right? He's still not with them until chapter 18. Jesus says in verse 14 to these disciples, to these 11, he says, you are my friends if you do whatever I command. Now, as we get more advanced in Greek, we'll see that this is in the subjunctive, which means it's a possibility. It's not a guarantee, as English sometimes can give people the impression, and people come to all kinds of eternal security conclusions and stuff, whatever. There's many people that know Greek very well, teach Greek, and yet I don't understand why they don't see this stuff. Anyway, that's another conversation. But it's if they do whatever he commands, he says, you are my friends. Now, this is the word philos. We're going to see that. Philos in chapter 15. This is not the one that we're going to see in chapter 18, where Jesus says, according to English translations, hey, friend, do now whatever you've come to do, right? ἑταῖρος versus philos. So we're going to see that here in a second. Chapter 16, we're leading up to chapter 18, where that's when the action takes place. Jesus gives hope to these disciples. He says, hey, listen, I'm going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you as orphans. He says in chapter 15, he says, but, your joy will be turned to, your sorrow will be turned to joy. I'm going to send my Holy Spirit. That's necessary to happen, and all that kind of talk. He's giving them hope because they may not get it right now, but they're about to get it pretty soon, right? Real soon. They're going to be freaked out, and it's going to probably take a day or something, or maybe even after Jesus rises from the dead, before they reflect on this stuff and go, oh, yeah, right, that's why he said that. So anyway, he ends with indicating that he has already overcome the world. He's already defeated the world. So he's referring to the prince of this world, the ruler of this world. He's already overcome him, right? So we saw some of that language in chapter 12 and 13. Chapter 17, right there in front of his disciples. He's not yet going to the Garden of Gethsemane. It says in chapter 18, right at the very beginning. So he's not giving this prayer in Gethsemane. He's giving it right there with his disciples at the Passover, table. And he just starts breaking out, lifts up his eyes, looks to heaven, and starts praying to his Father. And it's an amazing prayer. It's probably one of the most amazing prayers, in my opinion, in the Bible. And then here, then he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Judas and the Roman soldiers come to get Jesus. And Matthew's Gospel shows, okay, so John's Gospel doesn't show this, but John's Gospel was written way after Matthew's Gospel. Even church history, not going by scholars so much, but even church history shows that. When many disciples at the end of the first century were coaxing John to write this gospel, he wasn't going to. And as church history records, Eusebius and Ecclesiastical Church History, if you want to Google it, he records that, these words that were handed down, what John is telling them, and he said that, okay, he would write a different gospel, but he would come at it from a different angle. Now, that's my paraphrase. That's not exactly how he said it, of course, but that's why his gospel reads so much differently. And so that's why he doesn't record those words that Matthew did, because Matthew already did, right? So we see that, where's my mouse? Matthew's gospel shows that Jesus getting kissed, okay, again, philos, well, we're going to see that. See the distinction between the word friend and kiss, and, phileo is the verb that has to do with, like, having love and affection, not compassion, but affection, yeah, I guess is a good word. So it's not really love like agapao, alpha contract, love, but it's really close related. It's the basis of the word friend. So it's that kind of affection, friendship, right? But that's not the word Jesus uses here in John chapter 18. Or it's not John chapter 18, sorry. We're going to look at Matthew's Gospel. Matthew 26 is where Matthew is writing this. And he uses this word. And so we're going to see this appears in the New Testament 3 times. And all 3 times it's Jesus speaking, and he's using it. One time is when he's talking to Judas. The other 2 times he uses it in parables. Let's go look at the context of how he's using this word when he addresses it. And every single time it's the vocative case. It's where the person speaking, whether it's in the parable or whether it's Jesus to Judas in Matthew 26, what's the context? Is that person that's saying this, right? The vocative. So yeah, highlighting these words. So හෙտαῖρε is the vocative use. Yeah. So in all 3 cases, when somebody uses this word in the vocative to the person, was that person pleased with the person they were talked to? Versus when somebody uses phile or philos or whatever, are they lovingly affectionate and pleased with that person? And I'll just give you a preview. Yes, no. So let's go take a look. Okay, so first, Matthew 20, verse 13. We're going to look at these in more detail in a second, but let's look at the Greek just for the part that actually has the verse. Hode apokrites apin. So hode apokrites, so the one, and now this is a participle. I'm going to get into a whole stuff about participles here, but the one answering, right? So, and the one answering or but, and or, day can be and or but. You got to look at the context. But the one answering said, Heni auton. Now, this account and this account are 2 parables. So we'll see the context of who's speaking here and who's speaking here. In both cases, it's the master, right? It's the, maybe one of them might use the word despotes. That's one word that would be used as master, head of the household, or head of the, yeah, it's the one that's the head. He's the manager. He's the Lord. He's the master, So, where's my mouse? Here we go. So, හෙταῖρε ουκ adikose I did not do something unrighteous to you. I have not mistreated you. I have not done wrong to you. I have not treated you unrighteously, right? So there's a verb. It's a epsilon contract verb, adikeo, so epsilon omega. I think it's epsilon omega. Say, so it's an epsilon contract verb. That's why we have the accent there on the last syllable. Uki, and then he basically is sunephonesas moi denariu, right? Uki. Then so here's the genitive. So he's basically saying no. You've agreed to me or with me, and a lot of times when you have the soon as a prefix, when soon is a preposition, it always uses the dative case for its object. The object is a preposition. When soon is a preposition, it's dative. That's the clue that soon, its object, direct object, will be in the dative case. We'll talk more about that some other time, but that's why this is in the dative case. Sunephonesas moi, so you have agreed to me or with me, of a denarius, basically. That's why this is in the genitive, basically, yeah. So they agreed on this payment, and we'll see that. We'll take a look a little more of the surrounding context here in a second. Here's another example, ἑταῖρε. So again, this guy is not happy with this servant when he's saying this to him, and so he's using this word in the vocative direct address case. The vocative case is always direct address. You're addressing somebody. Kai, in this one, Matthew 22, verse 12, another parable. Kai lege auto ἑταῖρε pos eserthes hode me ekon enduma gamu. So this is a story where Jesus is talking about at the very end of time, when there's the supper of the Lamb, right? The wedding feast, basically, right? One parable of 10 virgins, there was 5 that had oil in their lamps, but 5 that didn't. And the ones that didn't have oil in their lamps didn't enter into this event that we're talking about, and 5 that did have oil in their lamps did. So we'll talk about that some other time. You can leave notes in the comments and show me your interest in that if you want, and we'll do something about it. You can make suggestions, and then we'll go from there. So, kai lege auto ἑταῖρε pos eserthes hode me ekon endumagamu. So how did you enter here? Not having. So here's a participle. Ekon, me ekon. So participle, we're using me instead of u, right? On rare occasions, you'll see u with a participle. Usually has a little different meaning, slightly different meaning than using me. Typically, me is used instead of u with a participle. So me ekon, not having. So the verb that shares this root, enduma, this is a noun, enduma, right? It's a neuter noun, so you would say the article that goes with it, of course, if it's nominative or accusative, is to enduma, because it's neuter, right? So to enduma. Now, sharing the same root is the verb enduomai, enduomai. So I clothe myself. I put clothing on, right? So this is sharing that root. It's a clothing, right? And this gamos, which shares the root with the verb gameo, epsilon contract, gameo, to marry, to get married, right? Gamos is the noun, and so gamu it's in the genitive. So it's a clothing of wedding, right? Of a wedding, right? So a wedding garment is a good translation. And then ho de afi, let's see, efimothe. So this is omicron contract verb, phimo, so omicron omega would be the ending in the lexicon, and I use this in my cartoon where Jesus calms the sea, and basically Jesus says to the sea, phimotheti, like basically muzzled. Like this is when you like muzzle a dog. You put a muzzle and you clamp his mouth shut, and you put something over it, right? And so that's what this is, except it's a verb, right? So it's to do that, right? So when Jesus says that to the sea, he's like saying, shut up. He's like saying, be muzzled, right? And stop the raging kind of thing or whatever. So hode efimothe. So but the one that is muzzled, and it goes on from there. We'll look at the context in a second. But anyway, just want to mention that. So here's the account of Jesus being betrayed, right? So it matches up with the account we were just looking at in the Gospel of John. It starts from chapter 13 all the way to chapter 18. And this passage here, chapter 26, matches up with chapter 18 somewhat, right? Even 18 and 19, right? Some of it, a little bit of overlap there. So here we got Jesus saying some things. We got part of this account that's not repeated in John 18. So, hode Jesus epen auto ἑταῖρε, ευχό, πάρε, τότε προσελθόντες, επέβαλον τας χέρας επί των Ιησούν και εκράτησαν αυτόν. So it says, now names always have the article with it, right? So we wouldn't say the Jesus, but that's kind of what they say in Greek. So we would just say, but Jesus or and Jesus, we'd have to look at the context. He said to him, and he uses the vocative like all these, so it's direct address. He's talking to him. It's not ἑταῖρος, which is the nominative, where it's like somebody is this ἑταῖρος, that companion or friend or whatever. We're going to take a look and see, is there more to it than that? But it's the vocative, it's direct address, right? I keep trying to find my mouse, sorry. ἑταῖρε, ephol, upon that, are you present? And it says then, tote, those having gone towards him, kind of epebalo, so it's like epibalo, so throw upon, right? Tas heras, epiton Yesun, because they threw upon their hands on Jesus, and they ekratesan auton, so they grabbed him, basically, is kind of what that is. But anyway, let's go take a look at the surrounding context for these stories. Now we're going to look at them in English, so let's get a feel more for this. We're going to look in the lexicons on ἑταῖρος versus philos. Okay, so we get this first one, right? Matthew 20 verse 13. We were just looking at it in Greek. So let's just look at it in English and let's get a feel for what we're talking about here. So Matthew 20. Okay, we'll start up here, verse 1. So Jesus starts telling a parable. For the kingdom of heaven is like, that's always a clue, he's going to tell a parable. A master of a house, that's the despot, I think it was despotes was the word they were using. Master of a house, he went out early in the morning to hire laborers in his vineyard. After agreeing, that's what we saw already, he said that the guy at the very end said, you agreed with me for a denarius, and this is where that's happening. He agreed with the laborers for a denarius, and he sent them into his vineyard. So here's some that he's hiring very early in the morning. And one of them, we'll see, there's a conversation that takes place. We already touched on it, right? So, and then later on at the 3rd hour of the day, he hired some. They were idle, they weren't doing anything. And then later on the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he hired some other ones. They weren't doing anything. And then finally, just before the end of the day, at the 11th hour, that last hour, he found some others who weren't doing anything. So he hired them, right? And so we see that conversation. And then he says to his servants, hey, call in all the laborers. So this is the end of the day. So apparently this is at the 12th hour. At the end of the day, beginning with the last, up into the first. So beginning with the last. In other words, the very first one that he hired, right? Now he hired a few of them, but just one of them kind of has a little bit of an attitude with the head of the household there. And let's see the dynamic that goes on. The one that gets called ἑταῖρος, right? So... and so he says, yeah, let's pay the ones first beginning with the last and then up until the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first, early in the morning, right, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled, it's more than one, grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour. These that you hired last have only worked 1 hour. You have made them equal to us who have borne the burden in the heat of the day. Says, but he replied to one of them, ἑταῖρε, I am doing you no wrong. Remember what we saw in the Greek? Trying to remember exactly what it says. Ουκ αδικose, yeah, something like that. But anyway, I didn't do any wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I want to put emphasis on that. Go. Basically, get out of here. Take what we agreed on. I said I would pay you. Here's the money. Get out of here. I chose to give you to the last worker what I would give you as well. You know, the first and the last, right? Am I not allowed to do what I want with my own money? That's basically what he's saying. And I think this is terrible translation. This is archaic language when it's the ESV. That's unnecessary. So let's look at one of the other ones. The archaic language, man, making it confusing for people really is one of my pet peeves. It so irritates me. It's really because of the King James tradition. People are afraid to make it clear language. They feel like, I can't change it too much, otherwise people won't buy my Bibles. Anyway, I digress. Let me get back on point here. so here he says, is it not, well, they say lawful. That's King James. It's not really lawful. Is it not permissible? Existen. It's the to be verb, Amy, estin, except it's got a prefix, ex. And it's the idea of something being permitted or permissible or acceptable or something like that. Is it not existen moi poyen ho ego thelo met idion argurion, something like that, with my own money, right? Is thine eye evil because I am good? So here's a little idiomatic expression from Hebrew. It's kind of when somebody has an evil eye for their brother. Anyway, we'll talk about that some other time. So the last shall be first, right? So these ones that were hired at the 11th hour would be first. And the first, the ones that were hired early, would be last because they got an attitude problem. For many are called, but few are chosen, right? Few are selected, few are picked out, few are chosen. And, you know, from the Greek eklego, people come up with this, or even the noun eklektos, they come up with the transliterated word, which is elect. And I think that comes from King James. And, oh, that word has been so, there's such crazy doctrines wrapped around that. It's just somebody that's chosen. Many people are called, and then Jesus chooses some of them. You know, first he calls, and many come, and then later on he chooses some, right? And this is a clue. These parables are a clue of the ones that get chosen, and many people just ignore them. Anyway, so this is Matthew 20. So this is that first one, right? So this is this one here. I'm not mistreating you, right? So heder. And so the next one, let's look at the next one. Matthew 22, verse 12. Okay, so that's this one. So again, you know, Jesus is telling, again, Jesus spoke to them in parables. So again, another parable, right? So two parables, he uses that word, and other than that, the only other time this word is used in the New Testament is when he himself is talking to Judas Iscariot. So let's pay close attention to how the context frames the use of this word. And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, right? We're talking about the wedding feast. But they would not come. And again, he sent out those servants again. Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen, my fat calves, and I have slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention. And he went off, one to his farm, another to his business, right? While the rest that he called seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. Check that out. The king was angry at these people. Keep that in mind, because that has everything to do with why he calls him heder. Okay, king was angry and sent out his troop, destroyed those murders, burned their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out to the road and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. And when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there was a man there with no wedding garment, right? That was the verse we were reading. And he said to him, ἑταῖρε. Yeah, in fact, we can go here. ἑταῖρε, pos eselthes hode. That's what he said. How did you come in here? Yeah, without a wedding garment. Yeah, me ekon enduma gamu. Not having a wedding garment. And the man was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot. Is the master pleased with this person? No. Bind him hand and foot, cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, few are chosen. Many are selected. Few are selected. Few are picked. Right? That's interesting. So this is the context of him saying ἑταῖρε in both cases. And the only other time, both times he's not happy with that person. He's very angry, right? And then in this time, it's Judas Iscariot. I don't think I need to say anything more than that. Now let's go look and search out the lexicon, all right? So we'll consider. Let's see let's see, do I have it here? What Strong says, but we're going to look at my favorite dictionary. Okay, so philos, this is a word truly, yeah, this word right here, philos. It's an adjective. That's why you see the masculine, feminine, neuter. You don't see that with a noun, right? You always see the noun is what it is. Either it's a feminine noun, it's a neuter noun, it's a masculine noun. But you have all three. So how are we using it? If we use this, how do we use it? We use it substantively, where you use an adjective as a noun, right? So if I said "oh file," right, I would be using this as a substantive use in the vocative case, to say, hey, oh friend, kind of thing. So anyway, so beloved, dear friend, associate, right? Yeah. So I guess I better take this off. Yeah, mouse. Here we go. Get rid of that. Okay. So ἑταῖρε. Yeah, companion. So this is what this says. We'll just listen to what Strong says. Ho ἑταῖρος, right? So companion, comrade, friend, and again, it's only in here 3 times, right? Those 3 times I mentioned, right? That's it. So here's what it says. Properly a companion, normally an impostor, posing to be a comrade, but in reality only has his own interests in mind. I guess you could say that might be in common with all these accounts. Supposed friend suggests someone viewed, associated as a friend, but actually an impostor acting in self-gain. I mean, that's what Strong says, right? So let's go look at what we see in the LSJ, right? So here's, I'm not going to start with ἑταῖρος. We're going to look at that in just a second, but I'm already looking at this, so I'll go ahead and use this. So it's using all of these words up to, let me use my pen, yeah, all the way up to like this point, right at the row. That's the stem, right? This is the stem. And then we put the endings on it that give it a different spin. Make it a noun, make it a verb, make it, whatever, and yeah. So if we look at this one, ἑταῖρος. So this would be a person. Usually this ending is typically a person, typically. But it's definitely a noun, right? ἑταῖρος. So ἑταῖρος. Now they don't tell us much, but they do give us this word in Latin. So I went and looked that up, and here's what I'm seeing. Contubernium meant dwelling together as of soldiers or animals, but referred especially a quasi-marital union between slave free, something like that. So keep that in mind as we continue looking. So we're going to look at others that share. So ἑταῖρος, here we go. So here's the word, right? So it says a companion, comrade, companion, fellow slave, messmate, so that would be somebody that eats together, pupil, disciple, metaphor, something like that. Let's see, political partisans, members of religious guild, rarely of lovers, but could be. This particular word is how it was used. Companion, courtesan, opposed to porne, common prostitute. So it's saying as opposed to. That's interesting. So, but let's look at others that share the same root. So, ἑταῖρος. So this would be the deeds of ἑταῖρος. And so they say, well, it's pretty much the same as this one. Let's go look at that one. ἑταῖρε, companionship, association, brotherhood, political club, comradeship, connection. Okay, so far so good. The way that those are used for whatever few writings that we have in antiquity from Greek. But let's look at a few others. So here's ἑταῖρεον. Let's see, ἑταῖρεos. Okay, so amor from Latin, yeah, has to do with like love. Yeah, companions preside over fellowship. So here's the verb in the middle passive. So ἑταῖρεο, the active, epsilon contract. Here it is in the middle passive. To keep company with the prostitute. So this is the active voice, right? Keep company with a prostitute. Yeah, so that sort of thing. And then here it is in the middle passive, prostitute oneself. So here's a writing that supports that idea. ἑταῖρε, companion or attendant. Yeah, let me get rid of this. Okay. I thought I got rid of it. Oh well. ἑταΐριζω, to be a comrade. Okay, still, yeah, nothing really derogatory there. Let's see. I don't think these are all in, not too many of these in English, like some of these Spanish and German and whatever. Middle Liddell to be a conversation. Yeah, LSJ is Liddell, and Liddell, let's see, I forget S and J, maybe Johnson, or, you know. Anyway, he teamed up with those guys, LSJ, that's really good, I like it. And then this guy, Middle, whoever, oh, what happened? Yeah, so anyway, going back. The guy Middle, together with Liddell, they got together and they did a, you know, a lexicon as well, a Greek lexicon. ἑταῖρος, we looked at that already. Yeah, we looked at that. They said, yeah, loosely possible, some sort of pseudo marriage or something. I guess that's it. Pretty much the verb, active and middle voice. ἑταῖρικος, befitting a companion. Yeah, something like that. Faction clubs, befitting a companionship. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to think what other ones I looked at. But yeah, some of these convey the idea of prostitution or something. That sort of idea. Kind of betrayal, kind of. Yeah, lewd man. Here you go. So this ending typically is a person, but definitely a noun. Hairiste. So if you put this stes at the end, in this case it's istes, hetide with the stem, and you put istes on the end, hetairistes. So we got a lewd man, right? So if you look up lewd, yeah, that's kind of somebody that's kind of, I'm not gonna go there actually. I saw the other day, or when I looked it up, yeah, Google kind of had some inappropriate images, so I'm not going to paste that up. But yeah, where are we at here? A little, yeah, lewd man. So basically, lewd man. This has to do with somebody that's kind of, in some sort of way, sexually like improper or whatever. ἑταῖρισμός. Harlotry. There you go. That's one I was looking for. So here's an adjective. How do you? Oh no, sorry, it's a noun. Yeah, ἑταῖρισμός. So somebody that's so it's connected idea of harlotry. So there is some underlying current in the root that has to do with prostitution or something, betrayal, something, not being faithful, because obviously, you know, that word is used in the New Testament in the context of, you know, there's marriage, like divorce and remarriage passages, and then all of a sudden, you know, there's Jesus saying, hey, he's not going to hold the husband responsible for divorcing his wife if she's committed porneia, if she's committed, you know, this word right here, prostitution or sexual immorality, or I mean, this is the verb, but porneia, fornication, sexual immorality, something like that. So yeah, the idea of being unfaithful, and that's exactly what Judas is being, right? So when he's saying this to him, and he's saying this idea of companion or associate or something, it's not like agapetos, philos, like beloved friend. That's not that's not it at all. It's somebody that is an associate and companion, but basically like unfaithful. Something like that is what we're talking about. And so, yeah, we see that like here, like all these contexts here is somebody that is basically, oh, okay, they had an agreement, they're going to be working, instead of being a faithful worker, he ends up being a complainer and somebody that's like accusing the, you know, let's see, is that despotes? Let me go. But anyway, yeah, I mean, he's accusing the master of being unfair and unrighteous towards him and unjust, and yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. So yeah, despotes, except now we take the idea of despotes, that root, combine it together with oikos, which is house, and it's oikodespote. So a combination of the two, it turns it into a it is masculine. Hodespotes. Yeah, hodespotes. So if we look it up in the lexicon here. So it's the it's like the master of a house, yeah. Oikodespotes. So despotes all by itself. I think that exists. Despote, yeah, despotes. Hodespotes. Yeah, the Lord or Master, yeah. The one that's in charge. So oikodespotes is what was used there. So anyway, in all three cases, these people are the master is not happy with them. That's the most important point, right? And in both cases, they've kind of showed themselves to be unfaithful in every single case, right? And so, of course, that's the idea of here's a married couple, and now somebody is being unfaithful. And now Jesus addresses that, right? But the point is that's what Judas is doing, right? And that's why Acts chapter 1, when they cast lots to see who would replace Judas, they say, yeah, he's getting what he deserves, kind of thing, or whatever. And Peter says that because, yeah, I mean, he's being unfaithful. And so it's not just the act that he did, but it's like Jesus is so faithful and he's just unfaithful. He's basically harlot, kind of towards Jesus. And throws him under the bus to the Romans and stuff. So it's ironic that the Jews thought the Messiah would come and liberate them from the Romans, and yet the Messiah came and submitted himself to the Romans to be killed so that they spiritually could be set free rather than physically free by fighting the Romans, right? So it's interesting. Okay, conclusion. In essence, this is what we're saying. Considering word meaning and context both, what does Jesus mean when he says ἑταῖρε to Judas? So let's consider the opposite that's going to happen at the second coming of Christ. We see three occurrences of this phrase. Well, pretty much the same phrase. Luke 19, verse 17. We don't have both adjectives, agathos and pistos, like we do down here in Matthew. In Luke 19:17, we just get agathos. So we got euge agathé doule. So well done, good servant. Here we got Matthew 25:21, and yeah, these are in parables, right? Matthew 25:21 and verse 23, you've got the same phrase in only two verses apart. Same thing, eu doule, which is pretty much same as euge. This is a little more emphatic than that one, but the gay particle is kind of emphatic. So this is an adverb, well, right? It kind of implies well done. Eu doule, agathé kai piste. So agathé kai piste. So it's agathos kai pistos is the nominative, and then this is the vocative, agathé kai piste. So he's directly addressing this servant, and that's in the vocative. Doulos is the nominative. So eu doule, agathé kai piste. So he's basically telling him, well, eu, well, and it's implying done, morally good and faithful servant. So the conclusion is ἑταῖρε, when Jesus says that to Judas, since he's the opposite of this, it is a companion, but a companion that is not faithful. He's unfaithful, prostituted himself with the enemy, as we saw in John chapter 13. Satan entered into him because of things that Judas had done. He'd already, where his heart was at. Not to mention, John mentions, which we haven't talked about here, but you can see it in the Gospel of John, that John said all along Judas was basically being a thief, and kind of, even though he was managing the money, Jesus let him manage the money. Even though Jesus totally knew what he was doing, he was scraping off the top, putting it in his own pocket. He was a thief, and that comes out at the end when all of a sudden here's Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead in John chapter 12, and then right away, I mean, the gratitude that his sister had for him, because his sister was shattered that, like, we sent word to you, Jesus, 4 days in advance, and you didn't come. And the whole context of it is just a really amazing account and story, and it's awesome. And Jesus, it says, because Jesus loved him, he stayed there 2 more days and didn't go. And the reason why is so that people would believe about the resurrection, so that ultimately they would believe about his resurrection, because ultimately that leads to their salvation, right? And he loving them, that's why he stayed. But at the time, she was a mess. She was just broken, like falling at his feet. She's like, Lord, why didn't you come? You could have saved him. And then Jesus raised him from the dead. And so what does Mary, after that, we were talking about Mary, what does she do? In gratitude, she takes all the money that she's got, she buys this perfume, she anoints his feet, is just, grateful for what he's done. And then, of course, Judas, because he's like, hey, I could get a piece of the action here. Hey, why are we wasting this expensive perfume? Yeah, we could sell it and get like 200 I don't remember what it was, 200 denarius or whatever, but it was a lot of silver, a lot of money. And so Jesus rebukes him and he says, leave her alone. He's like, you have the poor with you always, like you can help them. You know, with the implied message is, you unfaithful, you morally unfaithful and wicked servant is the implied thing there, or whatever. Like Jesus saw right through him, and, I mean, as we know and stuff. So anyway, so all those decisions that Judas was making, throwing him under the bus. In fact, I contend that when Jesus rebuked him like that, it says right away he went to the Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes. He went to the Jewish leaders, and he tries to say, you know, what will you give me for him? I'll turn him over to you, right? And so they agree on a price, and he does that. And it was the pride, it was the rebuke that drove him to do that. So that's my opinion. That's how I see it. Let me know what you think in the comments. You got any different thoughts? Love to hear it. So Judas, being full of the spirit of the devil instead of full of the Holy Spirit. When we talk about Jesus, he goes and does this wicked thing, throws him under the bus, and he hears this, you know, wickedly done, you know, wicked and unfaithful servant, all tied up in this word හෙταῖρε. So that's how I see it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, God bless y'all.